What happens when you give everything to your country, only to come home and have nothing? When the real battle isn't on the front lines, but in the streets, where survival comes at a different price. Welcome to Movie Bites, where we bring you the stories that shaped us, moved us, and stayed with us long after the credits rolled. Today, we're revisiting Dead Presidents, a film that wasn't just about a heist, but about survival, sacrifice, and the struggle of Black veterans fighting a different kind of war back home. We'll check in on the actors behind Anthony, Kirby, Skip, and more, seeing where they are now and how they've changed since bringing this gripping classic to life. First up, we have Anthony Curtis, played by a 20-year-old Larenz Tate in Dead Presidents. Anthony starts off as a hopeful kid from the Bronx, believing that joining the Marines will be his way out of the struggle. But when he lands in Vietnam, everything changes. Instead of delivering milk in his neighborhood, he's now fighting for his life in the jungle. He watches friends fall, makes choices that haunt him, and leaves pieces of himself behind in that war. When he returns home, nothing feels the same. The government doesn't care, jobs are scarce, and the girl he left behind now has a baby girl and is urging him to step up and provide. Anthony's left feeling betrayed, frustrated, and hopeless. Desperate, he links up with his old crew. But this time it's not just about getting by, it's about pulling off a heist. They plan to rob an armored truck full of untraceable money. Dead presidents. But as with everything else in his life, the plan doesn't go as expected. At just 20, Larenz Tate had already delivered a powerful performance in Menace 2 Society, directed by the same team behind Dead Presidents. He'd also shown his range in The Inkwell and more, proving he had the chops. Dead Presidents was the role that truly took him to the next level. Now, Larenz Tate is 49 and still a respected name in Black cinema, but for so many, he'll always be Anthony Curtis, the soldier who came back and fought a whole different kind of battle. Let me tell you about Skip, played by the hilarious Chris Tucker in Dead Presidents. Skip wasn't just Anthony's friend. They grew up together, went to the same school, and were young bloods full of hope. They both joined the Marines, thinking it was their way out. But the war hit Skip in a way that was different from Anthony. While Anthony fought to survive, Skip couldn't cope with the horrors of war. When he comes back home, he's not the same. He falls into addiction, and you can see how deeply it's affected him. He's lost, broken, and just not the same guy who went to war. Even though he joins the crew for the heist, you can tell things aren't going to end well for him. The way it all plays out is heartbreaking. Chris Tucker was 24 when he took on this role, and it was his breakthrough year. Along with Dead Presidents, he also starred in Friday, a cult classic that cemented his name. That opened the door for his role in Rush Hour, where he made some serious money and became a household name. Now at 53, Chris Tucker is still a legend, but for so many of us, he'll always be Skip, the guy who came back from war, but the war never left him. Next up, we have Kirby, played by the incredible Keith David in Dead Presidents. Now, Kirby wasn't just Anthony's mentor. He was the closest thing to a father figure he had. A streetwise hustler with his own pool hall, he took Anthony under his wing early on, teaching him the game, how to move smart, and most importantly, how to survive. He wasn't perfect, but he genuinely cared about Anthony, which made their bond so real. When Anthony returns from Vietnam, struggling to find his place, Kirby is one of the few people still in his corner. He gives him work, tries to keep him afloat, but deep down he knows the system isn't built for men like them to win. So when the idea of the heist comes up, Kirby doesn't hesitate. Not because he's reckless, but because he understands that sometimes playing it safe isn't enough. And even when things go south, he handles it like a man who's been through it all. Calm, calculated, but ready to fight if he has to. Keith David was 39 when he took on this role, and by then he had already built a strong career with films like The Thing and Platoon. His deep, commanding voice and undeniable presence made Kirby unforgettable. Now at 68, Keith David is still one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, but for so many, he'll always be Kirby, the man who looked out for Anthony, stood tall no matter what, and played the game the only way he knew how. Next up, we got Cowboy, played by Terrence Howard. And man, if there's one thing about Terrence Howard, It's that he has a way of playing dudes that just get under your skin. Cowboy? Yeah, he was that guy. Before Anthony went off to Vietnam, Cowboy was always on his case, talking down to him, bullying him, acting like he ran things. But when Anthony came back, oh, it was a whole new ballgame. Cowboy tried to pull the same slick talk, and Anthony shut that down real quick. You could tell Cowboy wasn't expecting that energy, but Anthony had been through real battles by then. He wasn't about to let some street tough push him around anymore. Terrence Howard was 26 when he played Cowboy, and this role was just the beginning. A few years later, he was out here being another tough guy in the Players Club, then went on to star in The Best Man, Big Mama's House, and Hustle and Flow. But let's be real. Terrence always brings that same hot-headed energy to his roles. And not just his roles either. If you've ever seen him in interviews, you know this man has real-life temper issues. Dude just looks like he's always a second away from flipping a table. Now at 56, he's had a long, wild career. But for a lot of us, he'll always be Cowboy. The dude who thought he could push Anthony around until he learned that some people come back different. Now let's talk about Cleon, played by Bokeem Woodbine, a man who saw the depths of hell and walked out with a Bible in one hand and a severed head in the other. We first meet Cleon in Vietnam, and let's be real, he's built different. This is a guy who's been through the worst, survived, and doesn't flinch at the chaos around him. He's ruthless, fearless, and when he decides to take a souvenir, aka the head of an enemy soldier, he's dead serious about it, bringing the squad good luck. Fast forward to life after the war, and Cleon's a changed man. He's put the rifle down and picked up a Bible, committing himself to Christ and becoming a pastor. But the thing about war, it never really leaves you. So when Anthony and the crew plan the big heist, Cleon is right there with them. But here's where things take a turn. After the job, he can't help himself. Instead of laying low, he starts handing out money like he's running a church fundraiser, making himself way too visible. And guess what? The cops come knocking. Under pressure, Cleon does what nobody expected. He folds. He rats out the crew, and just like that, it's game over. Bokeem Woodbine was 22 when he played Cleon, already making a name for himself with roles in Strapped, 1992, Jason's Lyric, and Crooklyn. Now, at 51, he's had a long and successful career, but for a lot of us, he'll always be Cleon, the soldier, the preacher, and the man who just couldn't keep a secret. Let's talk about Wanita, played by Rose Jackson. She's Anthony Curtis's wife in Dead Presidents, and from the start, you see how strong she is. While Anthony's off in Vietnam, she's left to raise their child on her own, carrying the weight of everything. It's not easy, but she holds it down. When Anthony returns, things are far from perfect. During his absence, Cuddy had stepped into the picture, tempting her with his charm. But even though Wanita had her moments of weakness, her love for Anthony was clear. She didn't forget him, but the reality of their situation was tough. When Anthony comes back, she challenges him to step up and be the man she knew he could be, get a job, provide for their family. Rose Jackson was just 22 when she took on the role of Wanita. She had already appeared in Hanging with the Homeboys, 1991, and What's Love Got to Do with It, 1993, but her performance in Dead Presidents left a lasting impression. Now at 51, Jackson married Michael George Moye, the co-creator of Married with Children, and chose to step out of the spotlight to focus on family. Her portrayal of Wanita was a testament to a woman's strength, loyalty, and the tough choices she faces when love and survival collide. Anthony's daughter, played by twins Joelle and Jordan Hernandez, was born while Anthony was off fighting in Vietnam. For the first 4 years of her life, she had only her mother, Wanita, raising her alone and doing her best to keep things together. Despite the struggle, the little girl remained full of innocence, clinging to her teddy bears and the love of her mother. When Anthony finally comes home, their first meeting is bittersweet. She doesn't know this man, but there's something natural in the way she connects with him. Even after all the lost time, there's still a bond between them. A glimpse of the father-daughter relationship that could have been. Now, Joelle and Jordan Hernandez are 34 years old. The twin sisters have barely spent more than 5 days apart in their entire lives. They work at the same company, went to the same college, and even started a home-based baking business together. For those who grew up watching Dead Presidents, they'll always be Anthony's little girl, the one bright, innocent spot in a world full of struggle. Now let's talk about Cuddy, played by the always unforgettable Clifton Powell. Cuddy wasn't just some dude in the neighborhood, he was that guy. The smooth, flashy hustler who had money, power, and the confidence to let you know it. While Anthony was out in Vietnam, Cuddy was back home making himself real comfortable in Anthony's world. He had the cars, the suits, the bankroll, and most importantly, he had Anthony's woman listening to him. When Anthony came back, Cuddy wasted no time reminding him who had been taking care of business while he was gone. It wasn't just about money, it was about pride. Anthony had risked his life for a country that didn't care about him, only to come home and feel like less of a man in his own house. And that, more than anything, is what pushed Anthony toward that heist. He needed to take control again. Clifton Powell was 39 when he played Cuddy, and let's be honest, nobody does villain you hate but secretly respect like him. From Menace to Society to countless other films, he's built a legacy on playing dudes you wouldn't want anywhere near your girl. Now at 68, Powell is still working, still sharp, and still one of the most respected actors in black cinema. But for a lot of us, he'll always be Cuddy, the man who kept the blankets warm for Anthony's wife while he was away. Delilah, played by 25-year-old Wright, is the definition of ride or die. She's not just Wanita's little sister. She's a revolutionary, deeply committed to the cause, and unafraid to get her hands dirty. While Anthony is off fighting in Vietnam, Delilah is fighting a different war back home, leading a militant group and standing up for what she believes in. She's sharp, fearless, and ready to put in work. But underneath all that fire, there's something softer. She's always had a thing for Anthony, and for a minute you think something might happen between them. The chemistry is there, the connection is real. But instead of love, they choose the mission, the heist that's supposed to change their lives. And Delilah? She's all in. She's not just part of the plan, she's the heart of it. Then comes the moment that hits like a gut punch. The job goes south, and Delilah is taken out in brutal fashion. No last words, no dramatic goodbye, just gone. It's a tough scene to watch because she deserved better. She went down fighting, but it still felt like a loss too big to accept. And Wright brought something special to the role. Before Dead Presidents, she was in Fresh 1994, an underrated gem. She went on to Blade 1998 and Three Strikes 2000, but she never did as many films as she should have. Now 55, she's still remembered as the girl who never backed down. Next up, we've got Joe, played by Freddy Rodríguez. Now, Joe wasn't just some guy in the neighborhood, he was Anthony's friend, someone who had big plans. The dude was fresh out of school, engaged to be married to Marisol, and seemed like he had it all together. But in the Bronx, things don't always go according to plan. So when Anthony comes back from Vietnam, he's expecting to find his old friend doing better. Instead, he finds Joe still stuck in the hood. Just like everyone else, his dreams shattered. Life didn't work out for him, and now he's all in on the plan to steal those dead presidents. Joe was foolish in the way he jumped into it, especially when it came to the explosives. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a dangerous, desperate move. And Joe, well, he didn't think twice. It was like he had nothing to lose. But as we all know, sometimes when you don't look back, life catches up with you. Joe didn't make it out. Freddy Rodríguez was just 20 when he played Joe, and it was one of his early roles. He went on to appear in films like Can't Hardly Wait, 1998, and Payback, 1999. Now at 50, Freddy's mostly behind the mic these days, lending his voice to cartoons. But for those who remember Dead Presidents, he'll always be Joe, the guy who was all in and never made it out. Marisol, played by 15-year-old Elizabeth Rodriguez, didn't have a ton of screen time in Dead Presidents, but she was everything to Joe. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She became his wife, the one he was trying to build a future with. When they were young, fresh out of school, it looked like Joe had things figured out. But life in the Bronx has a way of flipping plans upside down. By the time Anthony returns from Vietnam, Joe's still in the neighborhood, and things haven't gone the way he hoped. That dream of a stable life with Marisol? It's slipping away. So when the heist comes up, Joe is all in. No hesitation, no looking back. He wasn't built for that life, but desperation makes people do wild things. Joe didn't make it out, and the little money he was supposed to get, it was said to be sent to Marisol. It's a tragic detail that makes his loss hit even harder. She wasn't just some girl in his life. She was the reason he wanted more. Elizabeth Rodriguez had already made her mark in Fresh, 1994, before Dead Presidents. And while Marisol wasn't a major character, Rodriguez went on to build a strong career, especially in detective shows. Now 44, she's proven she has the range to do it all. Mrs. Barton, played by Cheryl Freeman in Dead Presidents, is that woman who knows how to make an entrance. Dressed in red, she meets Anthony on the street with a confidence that turns heads. There's a little something extra in the way she greets him, like she might just be a cougar on the prowl. With a smile and a playful tone, she says, "Hey, Anthony, how you doing? You know you brought me luck the other day." And just like that, she slips him some cash. It's clear Anthony has a way with numbers, whether it's the betting game or his skill at the pool table down at Kirby's joint. Maybe he's been handing out tips, or maybe he's just got that energy that people believe in. Either way, Mrs. Barton isn't about to let the moment pass without showing her appreciation. Cheryl Freeman had already made a name for herself before Dead Presidents. She was in the underrated Fresh, 1994, and made her Broadway debut back in 1983 in the revival of Showboat. From there, she lit up the stage in the Who's Tommy and Amen Corner. But her talents didn't stop at Broadway. She voiced a muse in Disney's Hercules, 1997, appeared in Mystery Team, 2009, and left her mark in multiple projects over the years. Her exact age remains a mystery, but you can bet she's in her 60s now. Next up, we have Mrs. Curtis, played by the one and only Jennifer Lewis. Now, if you know Jennifer Lewis, you already know when she steps into a role, she owns it. And as Anthony's mother in Dead Presidents, she was that strong, no-nonsense woman who never bit her tongue. From the start, she wasn't feeling Anthony's decision to join the Marines. College was the way out, not Vietnam. She didn't sugarcoat her disappointment. She let him know straight up. She had always been so proud of his brother, the one who played by the rules, stayed on track. But Anthony? He was always the one she worried about. And when he came back from war, struggling to find his place, she didn't coddle him. She didn't make excuses for him. To her, being a man meant handling your business, no matter how hard life got. Jennifer Lewis was 38 when she played this role, and by then, she had already left her mark in films like Sister Act, What's Love Got to Do with It, and Poetic Justice. And after Dead Presidents, she just kept going. Movies, TV shows, you name it. She's been in so much, it's hard to even keep count. Now at 68, she's a legend, not just for her work, but for the energy, wisdom, and truth she brings to every role. But for so many, she'll always be that tough, unshakable mother who loved hard, even if it didn't always feel like it. Mr. Curtis, played by James Pickens Jr., is the kind of father who doesn't say much, but when he does, you feel it. A hard-working man, he represents the old-school fathers who believe in discipline, responsibility, and keeping your head down to follow your heart. Unlike his wife, Mr. Curtis doesn't question Anthony's decision to join the military. A former Marine himself, he knows what the service can do for a young man. It builds discipline, makes you tough, and forces you to grow up fast. He believes Anthony will come back a better man, just like he did. But as we see, war doesn't always mold you. It breaks you. At 41, James Pickens Jr. was already making his mark in Hollywood, appearing in films like Trespass, 1992, Boiling Point, 1993, and Menace II Society, 1993. His career only took off from there. Now at 70, he's best known for his long-running role as Dr. Richard Webber on Grey's Anatomy, as well as major roles in The X-Files and Roseanne. Through the years, Pickens has played many roles, but for Dead Presidents fans, he'll always be Mr. Curtis, the father who stood firm, believing his son was walking the right path, never knowing just how lost he'd come back. Edward, played by 32-year-old Isaiah Washington in Dead Presidents, is the golden child, the one who did everything right. He went to college, graduated, and made his mama proud. While Anthony is out in the streets trying to figure life out, Edward is the blueprint, the example their mother wants him to follow. He even tries to put his little brother on game, telling Anthony that in 4 years, he could be just like him, a college graduate with a future. But Anthony had already made up his mind. The books weren't calling him. The Marines were. Even though Isaiah Washington wasn't credited for his role in Dead Presidents, he made his mark as the responsible, educated older brother, a contrast to Anthony's turbulent journey. He had already been building a strong career with roles in Strapped, 1993, Spike Lee's Crooklyn, 1994, and Clockers, 1995. He was that actor who could step into a scene and make it matter. Now 61, Washington has had a successful career in both film and television. He became widely known for his role as Dr. Preston Burke on Grey's Anatomy, but his filmography is stacked with powerful performances in movies like Romeo Must Die and Get on the Bus. Whether credited or not, his role in Dead Presidents is a reminder of how sometimes the quietest characters make the loudest impact. And then we have Spider, played by 31-year-old Carlton Wilborn. Remember him? He was the dude who tried to play Kirby and ended up making one of the dumbest moves in the movie, snatching the wrong leg. Kirby was already fed up with Spider owing him money, but when Spider thought he could get the upper hand by grabbing Kirby's prosthetic leg and making a run for it, he played himself. Instead of getting away, all he did was piss Kirby off even more. And if there's one thing you don't want to do, it's test a man who's been through as much as Kirby has. That scene was hilarious, but it also showed why Kirby was someone nobody wanted to mess with. He wasn't just some old hustler hanging around the pool hall. He was a man who had seen it all and wasn't about to let anybody disrespect him. Spider thought he had a plan, but all he did was set himself up for an even worse outcome. Carlton Wilborn might have had a short time on screen, but his career has been anything but short. Now 59, he's a globally respected and award-winning director, producer, actor, and life coach with over 40 years in the entertainment industry. From acting to dancing to mentoring others, he's built a legacy that goes far beyond Dead Presidents. Spider might have lost the battle in the movie, but in real life, Wilborn is still winning. Lieutenant Dugan, played by 27-year-old James Woolvett in Dead Presidents, is the kind of leader you want when you're deep in enemy territory. Cool under pressure, sharp as a blade, and always thinking a few steps ahead, he knows how to get his men out of tight spots. Whether it's an ambush in the jungle or an unexpected firefight, Dugan is the one calling the shots and making sure his platoon has a fighting chance. But make no mistake, Dugan isn't the type to be pushed around. He proves that early on when Cleon, fresh off a kill, refuses to let go of the severed head he's taken as a trophy. Dugan doesn't hesitate to put him in his place, making it clear that no one, not even a wild card like Cleon, will disrupt his command. James Woolvett brought a commanding presence to the role, making Dugan feel like a guy who'd been through hell and learned how to navigate it. Acting was in his blood, and he was on the rise after making a name for himself as the Schofield Kid in Unforgiven, 1992, holding his own alongside Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman. But just as his career was gaining traction, something happened behind the scenes. In 1996, he sued a production company and won $3,200,000, a victory that, for whatever reason, seemed to slow his momentum in Hollywood. Now 57, Woolvett still lives in California with his high school sweetheart, having moved there from Canada 30 years ago. While he may have stepped away from acting, his performances in films like Dead Presidents and Unforgiven proved he had the talent to go the distance. Next up, we got Dambrosio, played by Michael Imperioli. He was part of Anthony's platoon in Vietnam, just another young soldier trying to make it out alive. But man, the way he went out, that was some next-level horror movie stuff. When the enemy got to him, they didn't just kill him, they made an example out of him. They sliced him open, took his guts and his privates, yeah, you heard that right, and stuffed them in his mouth. You know it's bad when the enemy's not just trying to kill you, but also trying to send a very disturbing message. It was one of those moments in the movie where you just sat there shook like, did they really just do that? Michael Imperioli was 29 at the time, and while Dead Presidents wasn't his breakout role, he definitely made an impact. A few years later, he became Christopher Moltisanti in The Sopranos, and let's just say he had way better luck in the Mafia than he did in Vietnam. Now at 58, he's still killing it in Hollywood. But for a lot of us, we'll never forget the poor guy who learned the hard way that in war, you're not just fighting to stay alive, you're fighting to keep all your parts where they belong. And that's the story of Dead Presidents, a film that wasn't just about money, but about the cost of trying to get it. Anthony went to war, did everything his country asked of him, and came home with nothing. So he took matters into his own hands. But here's the question. Was he a criminal, or was he just doing what he had to do to survive? If the world turned its back on you after you gave it everything, what would you do? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you love movies that make you think, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. This is Movie Bites, where we keep the classics alive. See you in the next one.